what's up everybody? So this video is a long time coming because I actually received this bass, I guess it was December of 2020, and I've basically been playing it nonstop since. So I've had it for about a year and some change, and you know, I gotta be honest, this bass has been blowing my mind since I initially got it. The story of it is I first saw Serek basses. Let's see, I saw them online, and because I'm a big fan of Tim LaFave and Kevin Scott, and I saw that they were both using these basses. And the first thing that really struck me was the way that they looked. You know what I mean? They look kind of old. The headstocks kind of look like Rickenbacker headstocks, and they look like cool in like an old way. Initially I was like, oh nice, I've seen two of my favorite bass players, especially two of my favorite bass players in regards to their tone. I think that I have a similar opinion about tone as they do. Like, so generally, like, you know, the pedals that they end up choosing and playing a lot with, I like check out those pedals and I end up liking them a lot, or they just end up, you know, I kind of end up like identifying as those kinds of sounds. So I was, you know, initially interested because, you know, who doesn't like a new bass? So yeah, so I saw them online, checked them out online, and I was like, wow, these look really cool. I checked out some demos and stuff, and you know, it was interesting because I found a pretty wide tone range. So like a lot of the basses, they didn't sound, even though they still lived in the same world, a lot of the basses that I found had really different characteristics. It wasn't until I went to NAMM 2020 that I was able to get my hands on one for the first time. And it was interesting too, because anybody who's ever been to NAMM knows it's like you see a billion people that you know, and there's a billion people in the room. It's so much energy and you're just there all day a lot of times that you leave like exhausted. So I don't know, it was like day 2 or day 3 or something. I don't remember it, but it was, and I had been there all day. Everything was closing down. And I was, you know, at that time, let's see, at that point I had played a good amount, and I had walked around and, you know, seen a lot of like the homies and met some new companies that I was excited about working with. And as I'm like kind of making my last round of just like, hey, see you tomorrow or see you later, I don't remember, I saw the Serek booth, and I remembered, I was like, oh, those are those basses that Kevin, Scott, and Tim LaFave have been playing in some videos. And I was like, oh, I should sit down and try them because, like, why not? So I sat down, started playing it, and immediately I was like, oh my God, like, these sound incredible. And they feel really solid. You know how like when you play old Fenders, or even like Warwicks feel this way right now. Like you play them, and they're just like sturdy basses. You know what I mean? Some basses that you play and nowadays and for like a while now, they're thinner, or they're really light. You know what I mean? Like they're just like less. They don't feel as solid to me, you know, and most bass players end up having like strong hands because you yank and pull on these strings all the time, and so it's easy to feel like you're just gonna like crush, you know, whatever it is that you're playing at that moment, and so my first impression of the I think it was a Sacramento that I was trying, which is one of their models. This bass feels incredibly solid. The other thing is that the tone had a lot of personality to it, which is really nice. It wasn't just like in general like wood sound or like pickup sound or like electronic sound. You know, and anybody who's tried a lot of basses knows what I'm talking about. But it was interesting, and it was like familiar, but kind of like a really fresh take on a very familiar sound, which is always great. And also they all of them, all the models that I tried, they like sounded kind of old, which I'm into personally. That's one thing that I think is interesting about like P basses, is that everybody always talks about like how amazing P basses sound, and I think that like 3 out of every 10 P basses I try actually do sound like incredible, like people, like the P bass myth that people talk about. I think like 3 out of every 10, I'm like, oh my God, like this is that's the holy grail P bass, you know, that everybody like always talks about. But every bass, but and one characteristic that all of those basses have is like they sound old, like it had been, they've all been put together, and like years and years ago, and that was the bass that like, the founding fathers used, and like that Moses used, and whatever. But the thing that I liked about the Sereks is that they all kind of felt and sounded like that to varying degrees, which was really cool. And my favorite, and I've tried a couple of my favorite model, which is this model also, which were the Midwesterns and the Midwestern 2s, because I just love the way they look, and I just really loved them. And so I'm playing it, and it sounds good, and it's interesting, and I'm playing fast on it, and it sounds cool. I'm playing like slow and groovy on it, and it sounds cool, and I'm just having a good time. And then somebody comes over and starts talking to me. And, at the end of the day, the person-to-person interaction is always something that I care about, like, way more than a lot of other things. And the guy that I was talking to, who was not the head, but was a person who helps them build their basses and their electronics, and he was really cool, you know what I mean? He was really great to talk to. I was telling him, about, the company that I was using at the time, that I still use every once in a while, which is that hollow body Tom Clements bass. And I was telling him, I was like, this bass is that bass that I use right now is really cool, but at the time, I would show up to gigs, and, you have these like big, that bass is it's like a piece of art, you know what I mean? And I show up and I get the bass out of the case, and people look at it and they go like, whoa. I have the same conversation every single time, which is like, it's this company, it's hollow, that's why it looks like this, a single cut and whatever. And I still do love like the single cut, and I love the single cut look, and I still love the hollow body sound. I love that sound. I think that sound is amazing. But the thing about those kinds of basses is like, you show up and you have a bass that looks very non-typical, and people immediately start assuming things about what you play like, what you sound like, your tone, what kind of person you are, what kind of musician you are. And I told him, and it's a joke, but like the sentiment is still there, as I told the guy that I was talking to from Serek, I was like, I'm interested in a bass that like makes me look like less of an asshole. Not the bass the bass doesn't look like an asshole bass, but I was interested in at the time in a bass that like makes me look like I'm less of an asshole for playing a bass like that and showing up to, a normal gig. And he started laughing, and we kind of talked about that for a while. But so I'm telling him, I'm looking for a different kind of bass to play. And the other thing I told him was that, I'm interested in working with companies that are great to work with. I think I've expressed before in this channel that I've had experience with bigger companies and companies that have a lot of artists, bass players that use their instruments, their cables, their pedals, and things like that. And some of those companies can be terribly hard to get a hold of when all you're trying to do is like fix your gear so you can just play another gig. The cool thing was when I was talking to the guy from Serek at that time, he was very cool, very down to earth. I'm not like a super technical guy. Like I don't know all of the dimensions of every single thing that I'm doing. I don't know, all the circuits, and I can't name them all and things like that. And so I appreciated the fact that, he was, the guy that I was talking to was sympathetic towards that, which was nice. But so I took the card and I told him, I was like, I'm really interested in working with you guys. And they shared a similar sentiment, which was very cool. After that, I go home and I do some more research, and like I said, I'm not a real technically minded person. So the other thing that left a big impression on me was when it came time for me to order the bass. Is that Jake, the head guy from Serek, was super cool and was down to talk with me on the phone and kind of talk out some things, and he was really great about helping me work out, what model would be the best, what pickups I should use, the size, as far as like, helping me understand like what's probably best for the gigs that I'm playing, which at the time was a lot of rap, a lot of R&B, a little bit of rock, and some like a decent amount of jazz too. And, Jake was very cool with working with me, and I really appreciated that. That left a big impression on me and was probably the main reason that I chose to purchase a bass from them. So, now about this bass. This is a Midwestern 2 It has a Jhow fingerboard. I believe I'm saying that right. It's 32-inch scale, which is not the shortest scale that they have, but is like a medium scale. So it's not as long as like a Fender, or even as like an Ibanez or some of them. But yeah, so this is a relatively short scale bass in comparison to a lot of basses that people are playing. They also sent this amazing case that the bass fits like really snugly in. And let me tell you, as a person who flies a decent amount with my instrument, it has been way easier for me to get on a plane with this than it was with any other bass that I've traveled with. So that is really nice. For the pickups, I have Nordstrand big blades. At Jake's suggestion, I got the top one is a warm and woolly pickup. The bottom one is a clean and clear pickup. Wait, is that right? Or is that's like face soap, right? That's like a hold on. Oh, clean and clear. That is what it is. That's crazy. I was like, surely that's first soap. Anyway, but yeah. So the bridge pickup is the clean and clear pickup. And so it's basically like a PJ. You know, if you had to liken it to something else, it's basically like a precision jazz bass kind of thing. I also have on it, there's also a push-pull knob to make it active or passive. In it, there's also a Nordstrand 2-band, just like preamp. On stage, I like active basses because a lot of times going from section to section, like, you know, verse to chorus or something like that, I'll come down here and pump the bass like just a little bit, or going back to a quiet section, while yes, I am playing quieter with my hands, I'll also cut the treble a lot. You know, when you're a traveling musician, you know, you don't get to use your own gear, your own amps a lot. So a lot of times I'm just showing up and using, you know, whatever is there. Or maybe, you know, a lot of times it'll be like, I'll tell them, yes, I would like one of these 3 amps, and then I'll get an amp, you know, that I didn't ask for. So it's nice having the active preamp in there, just so that I can kind of like tone shape a little bit better, depending on what I'm working with. It has 21 frets, so not the full 2 octaves, but I'm not a bass player who uses that a ton anyway. It has 6 strings tuned B to C. Every once in a while, I'll tune B flat to B, but most of the time, I just do B to C. I've had some people ask me about my strings. Also, I use labellas, and one thing that is interesting about these basses is that, like normally on 6 strings, as you go from like the low string to the high string, your strings will get brighter-ish, but on this bass especially, as like these top like 2, the C and the G string, they were just really bright and they were really popping out. That's something that's kind of interesting about these basses in general. So what I ended up doing was I have a round wound for the bottom string. Then for the middle 4, E through G, I have half wounds. Right? So they're way, you know, and tonally they're way closer to flat wounds than they are to round wounds. But so it gets less bright. And then on the top one, I actually use a tape wound string. And that was actually by suggestion from a guy I know at Amp Shop Bass Exchange in North Hollywood. I was telling him, I was like, hey, this is what I'm experiencing with this bass, and he just handed me this string and said, try this for your top string, and it works great. With this setup, it feels very even, you know, going from... You see what I'm saying? Like, it feels very even. By that I mean, like, you know, as I'm going from my lowest strings to my higher strings, they don't jump out as I get higher, and so I don't have to change what I'm doing with my hands. I can kind of just play and not think as much, which is great. Which brings me to one of the biggest things that I experienced playing this bass, which was this bass does a lot of work for me, which is cool. A lot of basses, especially a lot of 6 strings, because it's such a big instrument, they're very like fickle. I mean, most instruments are pretty like wishy-washy in certain areas, you know what I mean? Where like, you know, maybe everything's cool here, but then you get to the low B and the low E string past the 12th fret are like real weird. I used to play a bass where this B flat right here would like really jump out, which was kind of interesting. It didn't matter like where I played it. It was just it was it was much louder than all of my other notes, which is kind of interesting. This bass doesn't really have those those kinds of qualities, which is really cool. One thing about this bass is that it's very like thumpy, and by that I mean like, even if I'm trying to play like very legato, it's still like this bass still has a lot of like percussive value to it. I've played some other basses in the past that like when they're just very smooth and they feel like butter and like that's really cool and I really like that. But especially once I got used to the percussiveness of this bass, it's just it's much easier to like feel where I'm at on the beat. You know what I mean? It's much easier to feel like, okay, am I behind? Do I want to be behind the beat? And am I ahead? Something like that. It helps me distinguish. Like when I have in-ears in, it helps me distinguish like this bass and the kick drum. You know what I mean? I have to do very little EQing, like for in-ear monitors and things like that, which is really great. But yeah, I mean, you can kind of hear it. And right now I'm using both pickups right now. You know what I mean? It's very it's very percussive, which is cool. Yeah, which is really nice. It's really great, and it's really it's been cool because I've been able to like really lean into a part of my playing that I think previously I wasn't, because I didn't have an instrument that really excelled at that, which is really cool. I have to try very little with this bass to pull the tone out. Generally the tone that I like using. So right now I have the preamp engaged, and so far I've had the preamp engaged, and so there is a passive active switch on this bass, which is nice. I'll talk about that here in a second. But I have the preamp engaged, and everything is flat, so bass and treble are flat. And traditionally when I'm playing live, I'm using that, plus I'm only using the bridge pickup because the sound is really thick. It's really woody. It's really wide. It gets out of the way really well, which is cool. You know what I'm saying? And it just sounds, it's like nice, and it just sits under everything, which is really great. The other thing about it is that like it has a lot of low end stills. Some of those like older P basses and like Stingrays and stuff like that, you play them and they have that kind of wide sound, which is nice. But then when you get down low in that range, they don't actually like have that much low end to them. It doesn't like light up the way that like really modern basses do. That's something that I really like about modern basses in general. But this bass, it's really nice. It really does kind of like light up at the bottom. You can kind of hear it. Those kind of like big drops. You know what I mean? Like you really get this like bigness on the bottom, which is really great. So one of the other things is the passive and active switch. So traditionally I've used active basses for a very long time. And when I moved out to LA, a little bit when I lived in Nashville, but when I moved out to LA especially, I'm doing a lot of recording. And when I was getting this bass built, I was talking to a very good friend of mine named Blake Rinn, kind of just talking to him about specs for bass and things like that. And then he was like, hey man, you may want to consider having a passive active switch on your bass. And he was talking to me about the way that passive instruments record and things like that. And originally I was like, well, nah, it's not really a big deal to me. I really like the amount of control that I have. Like so many other musicians, I get really touchy about my tone, and I really like it to sound a specific way, which, is something I've had to like really let go of just doing a lot more recording, which is no big deal. That's adult stuff. He was the one who was suggesting, hey, get a passive active switch on your instrument. And so then what I did is I was like, okay, who are like all my favorite bass players? Especially the ones that I'm listening to right now. Bubby, Michael League, Felix Pastorius, the ones I mentioned earlier, Tim LaFave, Kevin Scott, as well as the bass players, who I've liked for a very long time now. Those are like James Jamerson, Thaddeus Tribbett, bass players like that. And so I'm looking at all these bass players and I'm like, interesting. The majority of the bass players that I mentioned, like, have passive instruments. They don't have active instruments. Some of them do, obviously, but and some of them like have active instruments but don't use them all the time. But yeah, I was just looking at it and I was like, wow, that's crazy. I never really thought about that. The gear that my favorite musicians use, a lot of them use passive instruments. And so I did it. I was like, because Jake from Serek was really cool about it all, and I was kind of slow to get my specs back because I was trying to figure out like what was the best for me and things like that. And he was very cool in helping me with that, and so were some other friends of mine. But so I got the passive active switch, and let me tell you, recording passive for me has really put something together. Not that I ever really had a hard time recording or anything like that, but obviously recording is much different than playing live, and it has it just requires different things of you. But this passive active switch on this bass, because I've recorded with other passive instruments before, but this bass plus having the ability to go passive to record, it really made something. It really made something click, and it helped me, get the responsiveness and kind of like the emotion out of the instrument that I previously, wasn't getting recording with a lot of other instruments. So yeah, this instrument is pretty incredible. I've been, everywhere I go here in Los Angeles, musicians especially, most of them have heard of Serek, and most of them have seen other musicians online play Serek, and they look at it and they go like, oh, that's one of those, Serek basses. And I always let them try it. I'm like, yes, here, take it right now, play it so that you can experience what I experienced. And most of the time, 9 out of 10 times they go like, oh my gosh, these basses are great. I had a bass player, a really well-known bass player here in Los Angeles, tell me, he was like, you know what? I don't play a 6-string bass very much, but if I played it all the time, it would be that bass. I've had nothing but a good positive experience with this bass so far. So check them out. You can actually go check out on my channel. There will be another video where I'm demoing everything, so you can hear the pickups, you can hear the preamp, you can hear every aspect of this bass. You can hear it A and B. You know what I mean? You can really get the feel for what the tone is like. If you enjoyed this video, do me a solid, subscribe, check me out on Instagram at Jhow275, and I'll see you in the next one.